It's so good to be here, joining you all virtually at Herbivore. I'm Laura Bliss. I'm a reporter at Bloomberg City Lab. And joining me is Farley Elliott, a senior editor at Eater Los Angeles. I'm going to be chatting with him about the wild ride that the food industry has been on, not just since COVID, but in more recent years as well, and some of his predictions for the future, as well as how they intersect with urban space and the future of cities. So I just want to thank you so much for joining me, Farley.
Of course, thanks for having me.
So maybe we could start out on somewhat of a personal note. I'm super curious how you got your start in food journalism and kind of what draws you in about food as a writer.
Yeah, it's the same story everybody has. I grew up on a dairy farm. My entire family is all lumberjacks living in the Adirondacks of northern New York. No, all of that's true. But the reality is I moved to Los Angeles with like a motorcycle and a backpack after going to college on the West Coast. And I really fell in love with food via this city. I was, the poor guy trying to make it, working a day job, hustling at night. And I would stop at street food stands and just sort of curiously walk my way through the menu and ask a lot of questions. I'm a pretty type A personality. So if I go to one place, I want to go to two. And if I go to two, I want to go to 100, and so I went to maybe 125 taco trucks my first year in Los Angeles. And I used to have a little Google map and I put pins down of places I wanted to try or that I thought were good. It was really from there and the love of the vast array of culinary food, street and otherwise, in Los Angeles that I started to blossom this into a career. It took a long time, working freelance, having a day job, and all that sort of normal stuff that everybody goes through. But I couldn't be happier to be in the position I am in now to get to tell such wonderful stories about this amazing place we live.
There's a very strong thread of discovering the food through the city and the city through the food in Los Angeles. There's like the patron saint, Jonathan Gold, right, kind of presiding over all of us who call Los Angeles home, or at least in my case sometimes. And I'm curious too, or did you find that you kind of were finding out more about the city itself through some of your food forays?
Absolutely. I still find myself, if people want to ask for directions somewhere, I take them to the nearest restaurant landmark that I can think of in my mind. It's just a way to navigate the city, both physically, it's a massive place. Culturally, we're 10 million people in LA County alone, and much more than that when you get into the larger metro population that we cover. And so it's a really wonderful way to drill down into not only delicious food, but ways of talking about the human angle of this whole thing. And I'm very cognizant of not growing up here, being a person on the outside of a lot of these cultures and looking in. We're a 26% white county. Statistically speaking, anything I think about LA is wrong. And so the more that I can do to try to learn and observe and be a storyteller or more importantly, a conduit for the communities that I am covering, the better off everyone.
I'm from LA and visit often, including to see my dear brother Jonah Bliss, who's presenting this conference, and I feel very strongly about Los Angeles and defend it from anyone who would suggest that it's like a lesser city than anywhere else. I'm a big booster, but on the same level, like I think it is kind of a difficult place to unlock and kind of understand if you have very little reference point or any people there, right? And so the LA food tour is definitely, I think, the easiest way to fall in love and kind of show other people what's so lovable. I'm curious.
Agree.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I find a lot of my friends, I've known since college, moved here, moved away, people who come to visit, you're absolutely right. They can find that it's difficult to unlock the city. And I enjoy telling people that, we're only ever living about 80% of Los Angeles. There's this sort of top 10% where like Bette Midler and Brad Pitt are probably having a sing-along at their house somewhere. And then the bottom 10% of like entire neighborhoods and communities and things that you're never even touching. And every once in a while, you'll get to step into a little higher percentage either way. You go to a fancy party or you open the wrong door at some warehouse and you realize that there's other things going on. And I find that sort of mystical possibility to be really enchanting about Los Angeles.
Yeah, that's such a good way of putting it. I mean, I think a lot of California cities are kind of like this, right? Where we do have the car, right? And the car, and the way it sort of organizes the city means that a lot of what's kind of going on is behind a closed door, unfortunately, right? We have kind of limited public space. But you do end up with these kind of interesting little hidden secrets, including home restaurants, which we'll hopefully talk about in a little bit. But so I wanted to sort of get into what you have been covering. I mean, let's kind of rewind back to pre-COVID times. I mean, what were some of the shifts happening in the food industry and in the food world prior to COVID-19?
Yeah, so Eater is a kind of different beast than a lot of other media organizations, especially speaking historically a few years ago. Most people, when they think of having a job in food media, they think of you as a food critic, right? I'm actually kind of the opposite. My job is not to be anonymous and to offer an opinion on the green beans. My job is to know people and shake hands and get information. I'm essentially a sports reporter, except my beat happens to be restaurants instead of the local team. And in that way, I really get a lens into real estate and development and changing neighborhoods and a lot of the intractable details about restaurants and what they mean to larger communities. So that's been a lot of my focus for the past several years. Of course, we want to be the ones to break news about the fancy chef who's opening a place in downtown and some sad closures, especially these days. But in the middle, there's a lot of opportunities to drive people to specific restaurants and to offer them something more than just the meal, tell them that these places matter and here's why.
That's so interesting. And I mean, the places that mattered, I guess, and the kinds of places that mattered were really kind of beginning to change in some significant ways. And maybe this has always been true, right? There, we think of our modern day as being full of transformation, but maybe there's always been lots of transformation. But nevertheless, there are some big shifts to kind of point to, right? Which is like the increasing prevalence of food delivery services, really, I think, shifting the way people were consuming restaurant food, right, even before COVID hit. In LA, the legalization of food carts kind of changing, who was allowed to take up public space and who was allowed to serve their goods. So I'm curious. I mean, what were sort of some of the big stories or tensions that you were tracking before the pandemic?
Street food is definitely one. I wrote a book in 2015 called Los Angeles Street Food. It's a history kind of chronicling why Los Angeles is a preeminent street food city in America and on par with a lot of other places in the world. You're right, in recent years, Governor Jerry Brown has passed legislation. Locally, we've been trying to enact legislation and figuring out a pathway forward for vending. It's not all the way there yet. That's something that we track pretty heavily. There's somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,000 to 10,000 street food vendors in greater Los Angeles County. So it is a particular style of dining that is in many ways unique to this region, but also hugely important for a lot of people. And to not cover that while only covering the fancy places would be doing a disservice to a large percentage of our readers. That's something we're definitely tracking. Changing neighborhoods, you look at what the Arts District was in downtown Los Angeles, the ability to make a lot of those buildings through zoning changes mixed use to allow for ground floor retail and restaurants to come in while still having lofts above, transformed it from sometimes dangerous, largely industrial neighborhood to artist colonies and into something that is now, at least pre-pandemic, thriving at the level of any other neighborhood in any other major city in America. So I don't think there's any way to divide between the physical space of the city and what restaurants mean to those kinds of places. It's just about pulling out particular stories and identifying them and showing them back to the community as reasons to go not only support, but to investigate the restaurants you've maybe missed in your own neighborhood.
It's interesting how, yeah, a lot of the kind of changes I think that we've seen in the restaurant world in recent years, especially in California, maybe where there's been a lot of kind of movement, has to do with just like there being limited space, right? And rents are expensive, and in some ways that's sort of obvious, but those intersections, I guess, are pretty unintertwinable or necessarily intertwined. And so that leads me to this really great story you wrote last month, I believe it was. It's titled Riversides New Legal Home Restaurants Look to Revolutionize California's Food Scene. And this was a look at what a new law in California called AB 626, which was passed in 2019, I believe, had kind of done to home cooks and sort of new restaurant entrepreneurship in Riverside County and other parts of California. So I'd love to hear about what was or what is AB 626 and kind of where was the call coming from back in 2019, 2018, I guess.
Yeah, well, in some ways, the call's been coming from inside the house since the beginning of Los Angeles. I mean, there are old travelogues for this city, 1800s and before, that talk about a kind of dusty pueblo, and people would make it to the center of town, and they wouldn't realize that there were sit-down indoor restaurants because the center of town was just a wash of, Chinese pushcart vendors and outside tamale vendors and things like that. I mean, this is historically speaking, the way Los Angeles designed it has been in homes. It has been a secondary service for families who work a day job and want to make a little extra money on the side. And so AB 626 was enacted as a law statewide that allowed counties the individual right and opportunity to basically create a structured framework that would give entrepreneurs the opportunity to sell food licensed, fully legal, you get a health grade, all that sort of stuff, to do it from their home. So instead of I need a storefront or I need a cart out on the street, I can make food safely that the county says is approved, and I can sell it to you or put it on the delivery app just like anybody else. Now, the structural issue here with AB 626 is that it leaves all of the actual doing to the county. And so far, only Riverside County here in Southern California in the Inland Empire has managed to actually create a structured framework to allow this to happen. And that's thanks in large part to a gentleman by the name of Akshay Prabhu, who runs a restaurant platform essentially called Food Gnome for these entrepreneurs. And so he's obviously financially and invested and very motivated in making something like AB 626 come to life. But the consequences of that, especially now with the pandemic, there are dozens, if not hundreds of entrepreneurs who have the ability to get into the food game at a really low cost of entry and start selling food safely to their immediate neighbors. It's not about going and dining indoors or waiting in a long line for pickup or spending $80 a meal. You can walk next door and have a mask on and knock on the door and get great, amazing food that literally may not exist outside of that home because it is regionally specific or increasingly personal to the person who cooked it.
So how does that actually work in Riverside? Like, where does the regulation come into place? Like, do county health officials come and inspect like every home cook before they're officially allowed to get on the platform?
Yeah, exactly. And so what you see in Riverside County and what makes them kind of right for this sort of thing is that they're a little more business friendly out there, lower taxes, more space. It's a little easier to roam around and get things done. And the cities there are also very much in conjunction with the county public health department. And so they can work hand in hand to, yes, as you say, have people physically go to these homes, inspect them. Food Gnome and other people that have been getting into this space are building their own essentially guidebooks to say, here's what you've got to keep your temperatures at, here's how long you can hold cold storage for, all the things that other restaurants or any kind of food handlers permit will require. And the people who are cooking in the county of Riverside through the platform of Food Gnome are getting ServSafe certified at a manager level. So it's really a process that it requires a ton of knowledge and know-how and also takes a lot of time, and they are overseen. I think, you probably know this from your years in Los Angeles. Not that long ago, people that we knew were casually talking about street food vendors or hot dog vendors outside of music venues, roach coaches, danger dogs, these kind of lamentable terms that talked about the fear that could be associated with unhealthy food. When the reality is, these places don't have a Yelp page. They rely on word of mouth. They rely on feeding their immediate communities and keeping people safe. And AB 626 in Riverside is exactly the same thing. These are small business entrepreneurs that want a process. They want to pay into the government to do this legally. And so far, Riverside County is the only county that says yes to that.
And why is that? Why hasn't there been as much of a push in LA County, for example?
Yeah, so you're seeing it in other counties up in Alameda outside of San Francisco. They have said that they want to get 66 up and running. A lot of it has been on the restaurant lobby side. You know, you're not talking about the same kind of taxation and as a result, the same sort of financial will
Right.
that comes at the government level to get something like 66 done. It's also pretty complicated just because Riverside has a relatively lax Department of Public Health that wants to find time to enact something like this. LA County just doesn't. You know, they're the largest Department of Public Health, I think maybe in America, I mean, overseeing 10 million people. As we said, Pasadena and Long Beach have their own departments of public health, but they're just dealing with a much higher volume of restaurants and business that has to go on, from
Right.
approving ABC licenses and getting people in the door to make sure they have an A rating, shutting down bad actors. There's just not a lot of money in the coffer to try to get LA County to move forward on it. Hopefully, seeing the way that Riverside has been able to accomplish this, the successes that they've had, and knowing, as I said, that these people want to pay into the system at a time when we're facing budget shortfalls to the tune of billions of dollars, hopefully we can start to see some of that change in the near-term future.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the moment is on the one hand very much ripe for
Yeah.
this kind of legislation where people need money coming in, right? They're looking for, new ways of bringing in income. On the other hand, I could also see, potentially more scrutiny around, the health concerns. And also, I'm also wondering if, like, the people who are most likely to go after a kind of home restaurant authorization might be just dealing with a lot of other things right now. I'm wondering if you could just kind of give us a sense of who are the chefs and kind of home entrepreneurs taking advantage of this in Riverside.
Yeah, I think it's both, to your point, it's both a feature and a bug that these are individual entrepreneurs who are bootstrapping themselves. So you get folks that come with a culinary background but want something that is a little more at their pace or at their speed. And you also get people that previously just came up with a bunch of siblings in a fun house or a neighborhood, large family groups, gatherings, cooking food, and all their uncles would tell them, "Oh, you got to make this, you got to start a restaurant." Now they're trying to do this for the first time and navigate unhappy customers and navigate delivery systems and all that sort of stuff. So there's really no one size fits all model. I think the people that stand to benefit the most are folks who are never going to get the kind of culinary or sometimes even capital access to open a restaurant of their own. As we know, it's very expensive, even in places outside of the city centers. And if you go into a lot of these areas that we see in the 70s and 80s, when immigrant restaurants were forced into strip malls around Southern California, you still ultimately end up competing with a lot of people that are at the same platform as you. You're never getting access to the larger centers of financial power. And so the people that can use this as a stepping stone to something greater and can make sure that their voice is being heard doing Caribbean jerk chicken in a way that isn't seen anywhere else in Riverside County, those are the people that I believe are going to be the most successful.
So I'm wondering if you also just give us kind of an update on where the home cooks and restaurant entrepreneurs that are taking advantage of this new law are kind of at right now with COVID. It sounds like the sort of bureaucratic forces at the state and at the county level, especially in public health departments, right, are really just besieged with other issues related to the pandemic itself. Maybe you can kind of use that as a segue a bit to where you see kind of innovation or innovative new ways of preparing food, delivering food, serving food, heading out of the pandemic.
I am kind of heartened, in the midst of a lot of really dark times. I keep saying that I feel like the Grim Reaper half the time, just wandering around delivering bad information about closures or new lockdowns or something. But what I see coming out of this overall, and this speaks to AB 66 as much as it does street food and brick and mortar restaurants as well, is you look at 2008, you look at 2009, the innovation that was born from those tough economic moments that gave rise to Kogi barbecue and the modern food truck movement. People want inexpensive, very flavorful food, something that is going to tickle and excite them, but not be too out of reach, whether that's across town and it takes 45 minutes to drive there or financially unavailable to them. And that is something that AB 66 can lean into so easily. You know, it is so, it is food that is generally born out of cooking from your home. And so it's meant to be comfort food. It's meant to be home cooked food. It has all the trappings of nostalgia and things that people are already looking for in something like this. So if the cost of entry is low, especially with 66 or with, say, street food, where all you have to do is put a cart out in front of your house or even sell in your own driveway or buy a small cart, the cost of entry is low, the food is flavorful. If it resonates with the people immediately around you, then the sky's the limit. All we really need in the end is for the government, frankly, to get on board. I don't know if that's something that's going to be possible in the near-term future. As you say, they've got their hands tied with a lot of other issues, but there is money to be made here, and restaurant lobbies are worried about saving the existing brick and mortar restaurants. I don't think these places are direct competition, at least for a long time coming. It could be a scenario where everybody.
I'm so fascinated by the point you're drawing about flavorful food and nostalgic dishes and this kind of home cooked vibe that I guess customers are looking for in times like this. Because my last question for you was, do you think that the kind of food that we'll be eating or already, I guess, are eating amid the pandemic and in the immediate aftermath will be different as a result of all these changes in how we're receiving it?
Absolutely. I think you've already seen it pretty dramatically, and I think the effects of that are going to shake out for a really, really long time. I think the people that are doing well, and I use well in quotes because, you know, if you're looking at the aggregate, basically 0% of restaurants or people cooking are doing well. But those folks that have managed to find a relatively sustainable pathway forward are doing exactly what I said. They're serving food at a price point that makes sense and isn't a strain on people's wallets. You know, 2 years ago, I have a dining budget. My job, as I said, is to go out and meet people and shake hands. You know, 2 years ago, I'm eating at restaurants and just shooting money out of a leaf blower, essentially. You know, $150 tasting menus, and you're meeting people, and you go to the bar afterwards. I'm not saying those days are done forever. I'm saying they're done in the near term. And so right now, we are seeing a dramatic rise in cooks who are selling their food via Instagram and getting back to things that they learned how to bake because they had the time or knew how to bake from a family member growing up. You know, deep dish pan style pizzas, Philly style soft pretzels. These are all the sorts of things that are coming to the forefront right now. There's a woman in my neighborhood recently that we profiled who does Hungarian food, which you almost never see in Los Angeles. And she started cooking it because she had a lot of time at home after getting laid off from being a line cook and decided that she wanted to recreate the flavors of her grandmother. That's the sort of innovation that I'm talking about. People are going to dive deep in their own personal playbooks instead of feeling like they need to chase something because that's where the money is.
Well, you have left me extremely hungry, so we better wrap up the conversation right there so that I can get on Instagram. Thank you so much, Farley. This has been a really, really fun and fascinating conversation. And yeah, best of luck out there covering this industry in such critically uncertain times.
Thank you. I hope you stay safe and, more importantly, eat well.
Thank you.